If we're going to break the land speed record for reaching the chair of St. Peter, we need to throw the rulebook of tradition into the incinerator and look strictly at the rulebook of law. Because while most people assume becoming Pope requires a 40-year grind involving a theology degree, a lifetime of pious service, and navigating the Vatican corporate ladder, that's playing the game on hard mode. And we are not doing that. We're looking for the theoretical minimum, meaning we aren't asking who should be Pope, we're asking who physically is capable of validly stealing the job. And the difference between those two questions is the difference between a lifetime career and a very, very weird weekend. So here's how you go from nobody to His Holiness in under 24 hours. First, we gotta look at the character select screen, because to even enter the server, you must satisfy the primal requirement of Canon 1024, which says you must be a baptized male. Under current patch notes, the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, and the Church cannot ordain women, so sorry ladies, this speedrun ends here for you. But for the men, you need baptism since it's the door to the sacraments, and without it, you're just an NPC. Here's the trick for a speedrun though, because while priesthood takes years of seminary, baptism takes 30 seconds, so you don't need a bishop, you don't need a mass, and you don't even need a priest since in an emergency, anyone can do it. Just add water and the Trinitarian formula. Theoretically, you could be a pagan eating a bagel at 8 a.m., get splashed with a garden hose at 8:05 a.m., and be canonically eligible for the papacy at 8:06 a.m. But once you're baptized, there's a mental check you have to pass. There's one invisible wall here, which is the use of reason, because while history has had some suspiciously young popes, modern canon law requires you to be able to accept the election, and since acceptance is a legal act, if you can't comprehend that you're being handed the keys to the kingdom of heaven because you're currently chewing on them, the election doesn't count. So toddlers are out, but angsty, moody teenagers, technically they're still in. And once you've hit puberty, you're ready to skip the hardest part of the game. Now we arrive at the biggest misconception of the game, called the myth of the cardinalate, because if you ask a random person on the street, they'll tell you that the Pope must be chosen from cardinals, but that's wrong, because while only cardinals can vote, almost any baptized male can be elected. The governing document, Universi Dominici Gregis, restricts the voters, not the candidates. And even Canon 332 admits this, since it explicitly states that if the winner isn't a bishop, he just needs to be ordained immediately after he wins, meaning the law anticipates a non-bishop winner. And if the law anticipates a non-bishop, it definitely anticipates a non-cardinal. We actually have historical precedents for this exploit. For instance, Pope Urban VI is a prime example of the last non-cardinal elected, since he was just an archbishop. Pope Leo X was the last deacon elected, meaning he wasn't even a priest. This is a massive optimization because you don't need to spend 30 years grinding XP to get a red hat, meaning the pool of eligible candidates is not 120 men in the Vatican, it's approximately 1 billion dudes. But if you don't want to leave it to chance, you could always cheat. First, we gotta address the cheat codes, because historically, if you wanted to be Pope fast, you just bought it, which is called simony. And Pope Benedict IX famously bought the papacy in 1032 using his dad's credit card. The church tried to patch this glitch, since modern law imposes automatic excommunication on anyone who tries to bribe the conclave, so you think it's game over, right? Wrong, because the patch has a loophole where the law explicitly states that while simony is a crime, it does not invalidate the election. A failsafe meant to prevent civil wars over disputed results, but for a speedrunner, that's a golden ticket. Theoretically, you could bribe the conclave, get automatically excommunicated, win the election, become the supreme pontiff, and then, as the supreme judge of the faithful, lift your owed excommunication. It's spiritually bankrupt and morally repugnant, but legally, it counts. So grab your checkbook and get to Rome. Now that we know the rules, let's look at the players who absolutely shattered them. To figure out the fastest route to the top, we need to study the players who broke the game. So we're looking for speedrunners, the historical outliers who ignored the normative progression and used dynastic exploits, RNG, or financial leverage to skip the grind. Here are the top 3 broken builds used by previous record holders. First up is the classic strategy known as the Nepo Baby build, because the most efficient method historically was a combination of nepotism and brute force. In the 10th and 11th centuries, papacy wasn't a holy calling, it was a liquid asset, kind of like a vacation home in the Hamptons, but with more incense. The build. Benedict IX is the ultimate pay-to-win player, since his dad was the Count of Tusculum, and he didn't bother with the seminary, he just fought the lobby. Sources vary on this, but he was likely around 20 years old, though some chroniclers claim that he was as young as 11. So just imagine a middle schooler with the keys to heaven and hell. The achievement. Benedict's the only player to unlock the revolving door achievement because he was Pope 3 separate times, meaning he reigned, got kicked out, came back, sold the papacy for cash so he could get married, regretted it, came back again, basically treating the chair of St. Peter like a beanbag chair. The context. Then there's the context of an era historians call the papal pornocracy. And yes, that is the actual academic term. I didn't make that up. The His strategy was simple. His father, the ruler of Rome, forced the nobles to swear a deathbed oath to elect his son. John became Pope at 18, so he skipped the tutorial and went straight to the boss fight, where he failed miserably by turning the Lateran Palace into a frat house. The game over eventually hit him when he really died of a stroke while in bed with a married woman, showing a distinct lack of stamina for a speedrunner. The lesson. That lesson is that you can speedrun to the top as a teenager, but the game over screen tends to hit you pretty hard. The distinction. We need to be precise here with our terms, because Leo X was a cardinal deacon, not a deacon in holy orders. The record. This is a crucial distinction because he had not been ordained to the priesthood, making him the last non-priest to be elected pope, which proves you don't even need to be ordained to win the game. If you don't have a rich dad, don't worry, because you can always rely on pure dumb luck. Before the developers introduced the secret ballot patch, you can win the papacy by acclamation, which is when the crowd just shouts your name until you get the job. The player. Take Fabian, who was a layman and a farmer, meaning he wasn't even playing the game, he was an NPC. The event. Fabian went to Rome just to watch the election like a tourist, and while the cardinals were deadlocked, suddenly a dove flew in through the window and landed on Fabian's head. The win. The crowd remembered the Bible, shouting, "He's worthy!" and enthroned him on the spot. The stats. Fabian went from Farm Simulator 236 to Supreme Pontiff in one afternoon, which is a 100% completion speedrun in 0 seconds. Current status. Unfortunately, this has been patched because Pope John Paul II removed acclamation in 1986 since the devs realized relying on bird flight patterns was not a sustainable form of government. So you actually need votes now. But if birds aren't landing on you, you can try the strategy where you win by simply being the only person who doesn't want the job. Sometimes the server lags, and when the cardinals get stuck and no one can win, they look for someone who isn't even playing just to end the misery. The player. Here's Pietro de Morone, an 80-year-old hermit living in a cave. The event. The election had been stalled for 2 years, so Pietro sent the cardinals an angry letter essentially saying, "God is going to send you all to hell if you don't pick someone." The twist. The cardinals read the letter and said, "Fine, you do it," then voted unanimously for the crazy guy in the cave. The speed. He bypassed the entire career ladder, so 1 minute he was eating roots in the mountains, and next he was the vicar of Christ. The legacy. He hated the gameplay so much that he resigned 5 months later, making him the patron saint of "I never asked for this." So those are the historical pros who broke the system, but how do we pull this off today? Alright, you built your character and studied the meta, but now we have a physical problem, because you cannot sit in the chair if someone's already sitting on it. Physics is very strict about this, so before you can begin your ascent, the server must be empty, meaning in canonical terms, we need a sede vacante. Currently, there are only 2 ways to trigger the endgame and clear the lobby. This is the standard exit strategy where the Pope dies and the Cardinal Camerlengo steps in to officially verify the disconnect. First up, we have the myth. He hits the Pope on the forehead with a silver hammer to see if he flinches, or, the bonk method. But then there's the reality. He gently calls the Pope's baptismal name 3 times, and if there's no answer, the ring is destroyed and the seat is empty. It is significantly less dramatic than the hammer, but just as final. But if you don't want to wait around, there's always the second option. Thanks to Pope Benedict XVI, we know this feature still works, because according to Canon 332 Section 2, a Pope can resign at any moment. The requirement, it must be done freely, and the catch, it does not need to be accepted by anyone. Why? Because the Pope has no boss, so you cannot hand a resignation letter to a manager when you are the manager. You don't need 2 weeks notice, you just say, "I quit," and legally, you're done. It's the ultimate mic drop. Once the seat is empty, the church enters maintenance mode, where governance passes to the College of Cardinals, but their admin privileges are severely restricted since Canon 335 forbids any innovations. This means no new laws, no changing the rules, and no repainting the walls. They're basically just keeping the lights on until the new guy shows up. Can't just rush into the Sistine Chapel immediately though, because the rules enforce a cooldown where the conclave cannot start sooner than 15 days and no later than 20 days. For the aspiring speedrunner, this 15-day waiting period is your critical window, so think of this as the pre-game lobby. Now you have to be careful, because official campaigning is strictly forbidden. If you try making packs, ban. How about trading votes for promotions? Ban. What about promising someone the Archbishopry of Paris if they vote for you? Automatic excommunication. However, while you cannot say vote for me and I'll make you rich, you can have intense discussions regarding the qualities needed in the next pope. You're allowed to say, "Gosh, the church really needs a young, dynamic outsider. Perhaps someone with a speedrunning background." So while you can't explicitly team up, you can certainly signal your build to the other players. And you need to be the name on everyone's lips during coffee breaks, because once that door locks, the real game begins. Now we enter the arena, because the fastest way requires navigating the most secretive and ritualized election on Earth, known as the Conclave. Think of this as a LAN party from 1492, because it's a locked server event where the doors are sealed, the Wi-Fi is jammed, and no one leaves until a winner is declared. First, let's look at who holds the controllers. We have to deal with the age limit. Only cardinals under the age of 80 can vote, so if you turn 80 the day before the Pope dies, sorry, you're out of the game due to mandatory retirement. Then there's the server cap. The number of electors is hard capped at 120. Finally, you need the winning score. To win, you need a 2/3 majority, so it doesn't matter if you're the most popular guy in the room. room. If you can't hit that 66.6% threshold, you aren't leveling up. Once you know who's voting, you have to master the game mechanics. The actual voting process is a high-stakes loop called the scrutiny, which happens up to 4 times a day, and every step is designed to maximize drama and minimize cheating. Every cardinal receives a rectangular card with a Latin phrase, Eligo in Summum Pontifice, or I elect as Supreme Pontiff. This introduces the stealth mechanic. The rules explicitly state that you must write the name legibly but disguise your handwriting because you're anonymous. And if you vote for yourself, which is technically allowed but tacky, you don't want anyone recognizing your cursive G. This isn't a mail-in ballot situation, so you have to walk your vote up to the altar in front of everyone. You have to swear the vow. You hold the ballot over your head and swear a terrifying oath. I call as my witness Christ the Lord, who will be my judge, that my vote is given to the one who before God I think should be elected. Then comes the drop. You place the ballot on a gold plate and let it slide into a chalice, which is theatrical, solemn, and designed to make you sweat. Finally, the scrutineers tally the votes. There's the outcome of failure. If no one hits 2/3, the ballots are mixed with chemicals to produce black smoke, which tells the world, try again, and the outcome of success. If you hit the magic number, the ballots are burned to produce white smoke, meaning the server has a winner. The smoke's rising, but unless you want it to be black, you're gonna need a strategy to get those votes. We've finally arrived at the holy grail of speedrunning known as the any percent category. We've established that a layman, a regular guy like you and me, can validly be elected. But here's the problem, because the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, and if you aren't a bishop, you're technically glitching the game state since Canon 332 Section 1 mandates that if a non-bishop wins, he must be ordained immediately. In Catholic theology, you can't just put on a pointy hat and call it a day because the sacrament of holy orders is a ladder where you cannot jump to the top rung. You have to climb every single step. You start at level 1, the diaconate, servants of the word. Then you climb to level 2, the presbyterate, offers the sacrifice. And finally, level 3, the episcopate, the fullness of the sacrament. If you're a layman, you have 0 XP in the skill tree, so you need to speed level through all 3 stages in a single session. Historically, this grind was even worse because you used to have to pass through minor orders like porter, lector, and exorcist, which was total bloatware. But there is good news. Pope Paul VI released a patch in 1972 called Ministeria Quaedam, where he deleted the minor orders and the subdiaconate. Impact on speed. This removed 5 ritual steps, so now you just need a quick install as lector and acolyte, and you're ready for the big leagues. Now for the million-dollar question. Can you become Pope in a single day? Normally, canon law requires waiting periods between ordinations, usually 6 months. But here's the God mode exploit, where the moment you accept the election, you possess supreme jurisdiction, meaning you're the sheriff and you're the law. Here's the optimized minute-by-minute schedule for the ultimate speedrun. 9 a.m., the conclave votes. You get 80+ votes, white smoke rises, and the crowd goes wild. 9:15 a.m., the Cardinal Dean asks, do you accept? And you reply, accepto. Critical checkpoint, stop, because at this exact second, you have full admin privileges over the Universal Church, meaning you can appoint cardinals, fire bishops, or delete canon law since you're the Pope. You just aren't a bishop yet. 10 a.m., the Cardinal Dean preps the altar, and you use your new powers to waive the 6-month waiting period because you're in a hurry. 10:30 a.m., ordination to deacon. 12 p.m., lunch break, no time. We're doing ordination to priest. 2 p.m., episcopal consecration to bishop. Status update. You now possess the fullness of the Petrine ministry, both the power to rule and the power to bless. So you're now fully synced with the server. 3 p.m., the Cardinal Proto-Deacon steps onto the balcony and announces Habemus Papa. You might think this is theoretical nonsense, but it has happened because Pope Leo X was the original speedrunner. He held the rank of Cardinal Deacon, but had never actually been ordained to priesthood, meaning he was the last non-priest to be elected Pope. March 9, elected Pope. March 15, ordained priest. March 17, consecrated bishop. March 19, crown. 10 days because he liked to party. But with modern efficiency, we can knock this out before happy hour. Warning to all aspiring speedrunners, permadeath is enabled. You might get the votes, you might have the acceptance, but if your heart gives out before you get the hat, you might corrupt the game's entire database. This is the tragic tale of the corrupted save file of 752 AD. In March 752, a priest named Stephen was elected to succeed Pope Zachary. The setup: Stephen won the election. The action: he accepted the office, he moved to the Lateran Palace, the credits were about to roll. Crash: 3 days later, before his episcopal consecration, he suffered a stroke and died. Because Stephen died before the installation wizard was complete, medieval theologians argued he didn't count. The server didn't register his win. He was actually deleted from the official leaderboard in 1961. This created the most annoying bug in Catholic history, the Stephen renumbering crisis. Because Stephen II didn't count, the next Stephen became Stephen II. But then some historians said the first guy did count, so the next Stephen was actually Stephen III. To this day, you'll see popes listed in history books as Stephen II, parentheses 3rd, or Stephen IX, parentheses 10th. It really looks like a bad algebra equation. It is a version control nightmare that has plagued historians for 1200 years. Ironically, if Stephen pulled this stunt today, he would count. Current canon law favors Stephen. It states that acceptance of the election grants the power, not the ceremony. The moment you say I accept, the save file is locked. So under the current patch, Stephen II was a valid pope for 3 days, but because the official high score list is slow to update, he remains a ghost in in the machine. The lesson: speed is key, but durability matters. If you're attempting the one-day speedrun from Step 5, make sure your cardio is good enough to survive until 3 p.m. We've analyzed the source code, studied the patch notes, and identified the glitches, so now let's synthesize it all to a single optimized algorithm. Based on our deep dive into canon law and procedural mechanics, here's your definitive checklist for the Papal speedrun. If you want to go from nobody to His Holiness in record time, you need to hit these 8 checkpoints perfectly, because if you miss one, the run is dead. First, you have to select character, male. This is a mandatory requirement since 266 out of 266 popes agree, meaning it's hard-coded into the game's engine. Next, you need to acquire item, baptism. This is your entry ticket, because as per CIC 1024, you can't even enter the server without it. Then you have to wait for vacancy, sede vacante. You cannot start until the seat is empty, so whether by death or resignation, you need an open slot, meaning patience is key. Now enters the lobby phase, subtle. Overt campaigning is banned, but the general congregations allow for strategic discussions, so you need to convince the lobby you are the meta. Once inside, you must secure the 2/3 vote. You need the room on your side since UDG section 63 sets the bar, and while Pope Francis did it in 5 ballots, you want to do it in 1. Crucially, you must accept election. The moment you say accepto, you have jurisdiction, so the timer stops here for the jurisdiction category. Then comes power leveling. If you're a layman, you need to speed level your stats, because while Leo X went from deacon to pope in a week, you need to use UDG section 88 to do it in an afternoon. Finally, there's the episcopal consecration. This is the final seal. Just like St. Ambrose went from lady to bishop in 7 days, and once this is done, you're fully installed for 100% completion. But if following the rules feels too slow for you, there's one less desperate strategy. Finally, for the player who cares about winning more than salvation, we have the high-risk, high-reward strategy of simony. While buying the papacy is strictly forbidden and punishable by automatic excommunication, it is historically the only method to bypass the requirement of merit, reputation, or basic competence entirely. It starts with the mechanism. You simply bribe the cardinals to write your name. Then consider the validity. Here's the shocking part, because as confirmed by UDG section 78, the election remains valid even if simony occurs, since the law exists to protect the church's stability. They don't want to redo just because the money changed hands. Looking at the result, you would be a valid pope. Of course, there's the catch. You would also be an excommunicated pope, but that leads to the loophole. As the supreme judge of the faithful, you could theoretically lift your own excommunication 5 minutes after the election. It is the ultimate dirty win where you get that hat, ring, and keys, but you might have some explaining to do at the pearly gates.